At first glance, FM26 doesn't look like an awful game. It's still got that unmistakable Football Manager feel to it. But the awful user interface completely destroys even the best aspects of FM26. And then you've got this error message which pops up all the time. Look, back when the FM26 beta was released in whatever it was, like October, I think it was like a week and a half before the game was officially released, I was really excited about this. In fact, I had all these plans. I was going to do tons and tons of videos here on this channel. I thought this is my big chance. We're going to turn this into something big. But then I realized that the whole thing was nothing but garbage tier AI slop. The numerous sloppy problems with FM26 from the beginning totally tanked my enthusiasm. And the thing is that I'm not the only one. Early reviews for FM26 were overwhelmingly negative to an extent never before seen in a sports interactive game. Even to this day, the reviews for this game are absolutely negative despite all the patches and improvements that have come out. The funny thing is that even the positive reviews talk about the awful user interface. This one calls the critics crybabies. Even still, at the end there's a note that a lot of problems persist and a lot of things need to be fixed. Anyway, as you've probably seen, FM26 is on sale at the moment and will probably go on sale a few more times in the near future. So is it worth buying at a discount? No. No, do not buy this game. Do not take the discount. Just run away. Run far, far away from FM26. FM26 is not what you think it is. And for crying out loud, do not buy into the hype that Sports Interactive is going to somehow fix this game in the near future. SI needs to rebuild this franchise from the ground up, and it really needs to stop using sloppy AI vibe coding to create its game. If you're curious about FM26, the first place you should check is this thread, the official feedback thread on the Sports Interactive forums. You've only got about 24,000 posts to read, stretching out over almost 500 pages. And if you look closely, you will notice that the feedback is overwhelmingly negative, to the point where people are predicting the end of the Football Manager franchise. Now, after looking at this, you might be wondering if there's like some coordinated group of internet trolls out there that are trying to tank the game's ratings. In fact, there have been people on that very feedback thread that have been saying the same thing. They keep saying like, well, it's kind of strange, I hear the same arguments over and over again. Now, the truth is that there's always been a lot of gloom and doom on the official Sports Interactive forum. This goes back decades. There always have been people around who've been complaining about small and finicky things and who have said that it's the end of the world because this little thing is missing or that little thing is wrong. But things are simply different in FM26. In fact, I'll show you. The official Football Manager 2024 feedback thread dates back to early November 2023. The thread is technically still open to this day, and notice that there's only about 146 pages of commentary. Now, you can find significant criticism in this thread, such as this post by somebody who was frustrated that plug-and-play tactics are successful in a so-called simulation game. This poster concluded that Football Manager is more sandbox RPG than simulation, something that I've said multiple times on this channel. But, there is a significant difference between feeling that the game is broken because it emphasizes RPG elements more than this simulation thing that some people think is so important, and feeling upset because, you can't actually run the game. In fact, if you go back through the history of Football Manager, you will realize that we have never, ever seen a game quite as broken as FM26. Even Championship Manager 4, which got absolutely maligned by people who were upset with it, was at least playable out of the box. Football Manager 23, for example, has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. And it's hilarious because the top review I came up with was somebody complaining about the graphics who gave it a positive score anyway. Football Manager 24 also has overwhelmingly positive reviews. Notice here that the top review is somebody telling you to get rid of FM26 and to go back to Football Manager 2024. And if you check out the gameplay charts over on SteamDB, you will notice a significant trend away from FM26. In other words, it's not just a whole bunch of surly and frustrated people who've decided to review bomb the game all at once. So let me show you a little bit more from those SteamDB charts. In my mind, the fact that so many people who own FM26 are refusing to play it is far more significant than whatever the reviews might tell you. Back when FM26 first launched, there were quite a few people on places like Reddit who paid close attention to those SteamDB charts. Of course, now that FM26 has been out for a few months, we can gain more meaningful information about whether people have abandoned this game long term. In this basic chart right here, FM24 is in blue and FM26 is in green. The y-axis tells you the total number of players, the x-axis is the number of days since release. As you can clearly see, FM26 started out strong and then dipped significantly right away. It's hovered around the 50,000 player mark, though the general trend has been gradually down. FM24, meanwhile, actually added on players right after release before gradually sinking. And there are a couple of things to remember here, right? So SteamDB is measuring the number of people logged into Steam who are playing this game at any point in time. So in other words, if you've got people playing the game on other platforms, SteamDB is not going to be able to measure it. So like maybe it's possible that everybody who's playing FM26 is playing it like on the console or playing it on the Epic Store or whatever. Except of course, if you read through the forum post, you'll realize that those players have had even more problems with the game and are even more upset. Anyway, for Sports Interactive, the worst part about this graph has got to be the fact that FM26 is doing worse today than FM24 was doing a year after release. This significant dip for FM24 came during the scandals surrounding the cancellation of Football Manager 2025, which people have already forgotten about. That major dip in FM24 players coincides with the October 2024 decision to delay Football Manager 25 by half a year. FM25 was supposed to be the first Football Manager game on Unity, and Sports Interactive theoretically decided to delay it because it wasn't meeting this usual standard of quality. Now that's just hilarious when you consider how bad FM26 really is. Anyway, there's a lot of evidence that the early versions of FM25 were really just an even more stripped down version of what FM26 wound up becoming, and it is very painful to look back on this. These early work-in-progress screenshots from FM25 were ridiculed on multiple Football Manager forums and in numerous YouTube videos. And as you can see, the whole tile user interface concept was right there from the start with FM25. This screenshot looks like it came straight from FM26. So when I first loaded up the FM26 beta several months ago, this was the first screen that I saw. Notice that the design looks almost exactly like those FM25 screenshots. And remember that Sega's official reason for not releasing FM25 was quality control issues. Anyway, it's pretty easy to see why FM24 had that dip in popularity. But the other interesting thing is that the game recovered after all of the negativity died down. So in other words, as bad as the Football Manager 25 vaporware effect was, at least it didn't last that long. FM24 had a resurgence of interest around 425 days after release, after which it experienced a gradual decline in the build-up to FM26. So if you look at the all-time charts, you'll see that it's still hovering around the 20,000 user mark. In fact, as I'm editing this video, there are about 16,000 people playing FM24, like right now. This is pretty impressive numbers for an old game. Over the past month, about a third of the numbers of FM26 players are actually playing FM24. Now this is significant. Basically, about a third of the current Football Manager audience, that is a third of the people who are so addicted to this game that they can't stop playing it, a third of that audience has decided to play FM24 instead of the newer FM26. This is unprecedented. This has never happened in a Football Manager game in the past. As you might already know, I've been spending a bunch of time playing Football Manager 2017, which I honestly think is one of the best games in the franchise. The old 2D classic graphics engine might look a little bit dated, but it's still a great and immersive experience. I prefer this to the modern 3D engines. And the old 3D engine is actually really good for a game that is about 10 years old. Now the lifespan of FM 2017 on Steam looks like this, maxing out at somewhere around 72,000 concurrent players in a 24-hour period. If you compare FM 2017, which is in blue, with FM 2018, which is in green, you can see that the vast majority of players switched over to the new game shortly after it was released. And that's the reason that I'm picking on FM 2017 here, right? It's because the release of FM 2018 was actually extremely controversial. It's another one of those Sports Interactive things that people have forgotten about or just have moved on from that in hindsight actually was pretty significant. Despite the controversy and more than 70,000 players on Steam, the official FM 2018 feedback thread only has about 50 pages. Back in those days, the controversy surrounded removing the 2D Classic graphics engine, and people were really upset about this. While you might disagree with me, I've always felt that this is the best way to watch Football Manager. This allows you to see what's happening while forcing you to also use your imagination. The decision to move away from that 2D Classic match view came from Miles Jacobson himself, and his argument was that more than 90% of players were using the 3D graphics engine anyway. The official reason behind the change was something about making the game faster by taking advantage of multi-threading. Now that's another thing that should sound really familiar to you guys, right? Every improvement that we've seen in Football Manager over like the past 30 years has come in the name of optimization, but it's not hard to see that things have actually gotten worse. So to remind you, this is what the 2D Classic graphics view looks like in FM 2017. And this is what it looks like in FM 2026. I'm still having a really hard time understanding what was so wrong about this approach and why optimizing the game meant that we absolutely had to get rid of this. While I will admit that this is from the beta of FM 26, I haven't seen any evidence of Sports Interactive significantly upgrading or changing the new version of this, and it looks like garbage. Now, some people will tell you to use this FM 26 aerial camera view instead. Frankly, this looks even worse to me. I can't imagine trying to seriously play an entire match in this mode. Again, what exactly was wrong with this view? And so that helps explain why about 10,000 players or so stuck with FM 2017 after FM 2018 was released. The thing is though that group died off pretty quickly. It's nothing like what's been happening with FM 24. We're almost 4 months now into the life of FM 26, and yet about a third of the Football Manager community has stuck with FM 24. And this is not just a user interface thing. The FM 26 user interface is really confusing and complex, but it is the sort of thing you can get used to over time. For whatever reason, the AI slop elements of FM 26 don't really shine through on my system the way that they do for other people. But oddly enough, my biggest problem with FM 26 comes from the 3D graphics engine, which was supposedly the entire reason for the shift to Unity. For the sake of comparison, this is what FM 24 looks like on my machine. While there are certainly improvements to the player animations, it's honestly nothing earth-shattering, and the animations become really repetitive really quickly. In other words, the FM 26 3D engine is not showing you anything different than what FM 24 showed you, which is a huge problem because that is the major selling point of the new game. Compare those two to the 3D engine in this replay on FM 17, and you'll wonder what the point of upgrading is. And of course, as I've said before, the 2D Classic graphics just feel better anyway. It feels like you can see what is happening much better when you watch the game from this viewpoint. You see, personally, my biggest concern for Sports Interactive is that it has sacrificed immersion and the user experience in favor of slightly improved 3D graphics. Now, this is not an EA Sports game, this is not a Konami game, all of you guys know that. Sports Interactive really should not be thinking about 3D graphical improvements, not for a game that's really just a large, massive spreadsheet with extensive RPG elements. Or, in other words, nobody plays FM for the 3D graphics. I mean, if 3D graphics are important to you, you will likely find this unacceptable anyway. Euro 2000 for the original PlayStation looks really dated, and yet it still has better looking graphics than FM 26. International Superstar Soccer on the Super NES is 30 years old, and yet its graphics are more engaging and interesting than FM 26. In fact, ISS Deluxe for the PlayStation not only looks better than Football Manager, but also has an announcer, which is something that FM has been missing out on for decades. Even good old sensible World of Soccer has a more immersive in-game engine than FM 26, and it's a lot more fun to play too.
You could say that challenge was a little bit over the top.
But of course, Sports Interactive isn't going for that graphics heavy market, right? Football Manager is supposed to be a realistic, well, somewhat realistic management simulation, though it's honestly more of an RPG than it is a simulation. But it's not supposed to be a graphic focused game. And that really is where FM26 has been an unmitigated disaster. If you look around online, you will find numerous examples of sloppy coding, such as news stories referring to winning teams being reduced to 11 players. There are major issues with the game not reporting statistics accurately. These are issues that point to AI vibe coding. People have shown bizarre issues such as different scores for the same match showing up on the same screen. And the real funny thing is that Sega has pointed to its community dialogue and bug updates as a positive development. This is a tacit admission that the game has been horrid on launch. Now, it is true that Sports Interactive has been updating the game every 3 weeks or so, and the company does deserve credit for actually doing that. The list of changes seems impossibly long, and the bug reports keep filing in even after these extensive updates. So if you're thinking about buying this game, you really have to ask yourself whether it's worth it. If you've already got an older copy of Football Manager, or if you know where to go to get one without, buying it, do you really want to give them like $50 or whatever it's going to cost you for a version that honestly is still in the beta stage? The user interface is still awful and likely won't change anytime soon. The overhyped, revamped tactical system is extremely difficult to navigate, and it's really hard to find the information you actually want to view. After all of Sports Interactive's updates, the strikerless tactics are still incredibly overpowered and still dominate the meta. In fact, despite what its fans might say, the evidence is that FM26's tactical engine is the easiest to exploit in the history of the franchise, and that's really saying something. Maybe it would all be worth it if the 3D graphics engine wasn't so underwhelming. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should mention that I have not touched FM26 since December, and it was like early December, right? It's not because I'm trying to fight against Sports Interactive or anything like that. It's because the game is a complete disaster. Like many of you, I experienced hard crashes when I tried to do the most simple things in the beginning of one of my saves. It's easy to find screenshots of hard crashes like the ones that I experienced, something that was never common in the earlier versions of Football Manager. Before you decide to buy, you need to ask yourself whether you're really willing to pay money for a game that can barely get you to the opening screen. And as you can see here, I've played this game for less than 10 hours and I haven't even touched it since early December. Anyway, the bottom line here is that you should think twice or 3 times or 4 times before you even consider buying FM26. Though I've honestly barely played this game, I can't have the game refunded since I crossed that 2-hour threshold or whatever ridiculous thing it is months ago. But think twice before you decide to put your hard-earned money into the train wreck that is FM26. Now, I'll be honest with you, I might wind up going back to the game to do a couple of projects here or there. The reason why is to try to save this channel, which has been sort of in a nosedive for a while. Some of you guys have already commented on that. But I will never ever recommend that any of you go back and play this absolute nightmare of a release. Sports Interactive should be ashamed of itself, and Miles Jacobson should be fired.